Day 172 of the war in Gaza, the IDF is still operating at Shifa Hospital. Hamas gunmen fired at troops from within the hospital's emergency room, maternity, and burn wards and barricaded themselves inside. Elsewhere in Gaza, reports indicated that the rockets Hamas fired towards Ashkelon and Ashdod came from humanitarian shelters. More on this from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
The IDF is still operating at Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. Hamas gunmen fired at troops from Shifa Hospital's emergency room, maternity, and burn wards. The army says Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists are still barricading themselves inside Shifa Hospital wards. Hamas, the army said, is destroying Shifa Hospital.
בלילה שבין ראשון לשני, בפעילות מיוחדת וממוקדת של צק"ח 401 ויחידה שייטת 13, פשטנו על בית החולים שיפה שבעזה. המבצע יצא לדרך לאחר שהתקבל מידע מודיעיני מדויק על חזרת מחבלים ועל חזרת השימוש בבית החולים כמקום להתבססות שלטונית של ארגון החמאס. במהלך הפשיטה מצאנו אמל"ח רב שהוסתר בין ציוד רפואי ובין חולים ובין חוסים שהיו בבית החולים. במהלך הפעילות הכירורגית הפרדנו בין החולים והחוסים לבין המחבלים. את המחבלים הרגנו, ורבים מאוד מהם שבינו.
The IDF said the number of confirmed Hamas and Islamic Jihad captured by troops in Gaza City's medical center has now risen to 500. Hamas managed to fire rockets toward Ashdod and Ashkelon from a humanitarian area in central Gaza. Air Force fighter jets destroyed the post from which the fire originated. The strike was precise, avoiding harm to civilians who evacuated the area. Secondary explosions followed, indicating the presence of weapons in the area.
They deny the kidnapping of our children, the murder of our grandchildren, the rape of our daughters. The new Nazis we face today will stop at nothing to destroy civilization as we know it. The World Jewish Congress was created exactly for these times like this, so every Jew can fall asleep at night knowing they are safe in their own home. We are a voice for the Jewish people everywhere. We are the World Jewish Congress.
And Israel is recalling its negotiating team from Qatar after Hamas yet again rejected its latest offer in talks for a hostage deal in truce. This shortly after the U.S. veto of the UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza war. Hamas said it will now return to its demand for a permanent ceasefire. ILTV's Devo Klein has more.
Israel is recalling its negotiating team from Qatar after Hamas rejected its latest offer in talks for a hostage deal and truce. In a statement, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says Hamas's position is clear proof it is not interested in continuing talks and a sad testament to the damage caused by the UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire passed last night. The PMO accuses Hamas of retreating to its extreme demands, including a complete end to the war and a full IDF withdrawal from Gaza. Hamas informed Qatari and Egyptian mediators that it will stick to its original position, demanding a permanent ceasefire, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, a return of displaced Palestinians, and what it called a real exchange of prisoners. The announcement came shortly after the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution for the first time that calls for a ceasefire in Gaza and the freeing of hostages. Just days ago, Hamas had dropped its demands for an end to the war, allowing the mediation efforts to move forward. Now, they have backtracked. Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected the Hamas demands as delusional multiple times and insisted that its military campaign to destroy Hamas's military capabilities would resume after any hostage truce deal is completed. Israel reportedly offered a detailed document to Hamas setting out its positions on all three phases of a deal for the release of all hostages and has shown flexibility in several key areas. Families of hostages pleaded for their release.
אני קוראת לראשי מדינת ישראל להיות אמיצים, להיות גיבורים, לדעת שרוח העם מאחוריהם. רוח העם איתנה וגיבורה, ואם אתם תשקפו את רוח העם, כל העולם יעריץ אתכם. כל העולם יישר קו.
what happened today in the UN. I don't know how it will be effect on us, but everybody should understand. It can't be a ceasefire without bringing them home. It can't be a ceasefire without bringing them home. It's not possible. First bring them home, and then will be a ceasefire. This is the most logic thing that we can do.
Some 130 hostages, not all of them alive, are believed to remain in Gaza since taken captive during Hamas's October 7th massacre.
And meanwhile, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh landing in Tehran for meetings with Iranian officials. Coincidence? And on Monday, the United States failed to use its veto power to block a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza war, opting to abstain instead. All the details in the following report.
The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728.
The United States Security Council adopted a resolution Monday demanding an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas after the United States did not use its veto power, instead abstaining from the vote. The resolution calls for an immediate ceasefire during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and also calls for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages. Hamas is still holding 134 people captive in Gaza. The resolution is the first that calls for an immediate ceasefire to have been passed by the Security Council. The Council has yet to issue any resolution that condemns Hamas for the October 7th massacre. And it marks a shift in U.S. policy, which has to date used its veto power to block all resolutions with the term ceasefire. And just last week sought to pass a resolution of its own conditioning a ceasefire on the release of the hostages.
We appreciated the willingness of members of this council to take some of our edits and improve on this resolution. Still, certain key edits were ignored, including our request to add a condemnation of Hamas. And we did not agree with everything in the resolution. For that reason, we were unfortunately not able to vote yes. However, as I've said before, we fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution. And we believe it was important for the Council to speak out and make clear that our any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages.
The failure of the U.S. to veto the resolution has widened the rift between Israel and the United States. Israel's ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, slammed the Council for adopting the resolution and for still not condemning Hamas.
It was the Hamas massacre that started this war. I repeat, it was the Hamas massacre that started this war. Nearly 6 months have passed, and the Security Council still has not condemned the child-murdering rapist that began this war. The resolution just voted upon makes it seem as if the war started by itself. Well, let me set the record straight. Israel did not start this war, nor did Israel want this war.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple. And as a result of the U.S. refusal to veto UN Security Council Resolution 2728, tensions between the U.S. and Israel appear to reach a new high. The Prime Minister's office issued a statement saying the United States has abandoned its policy in the UN by failing to veto the resolution. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has all the details.
The tweets from the Prime Minister's office were direct and to the point. The United States has abandoned its policy in the UN today. Just a few days ago, it supported a Security Council resolution that linked a call for a ceasefire to the release of hostages. Prime Minister Netanyahu made it clear last night that should the U.S. depart from its principled policy and not veto this harmful resolution, he will cancel the Israeli delegation's visit to the United States. In light of the changes in the U.S. position, Prime Minister Netanyahu decided that the delegation will remain in Israel. National Security Advisor Tzachi Hanegbi and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer were due in Washington to hear American proposals for expanded humanitarian aid in Gaza and alternatives to a major land operation in Rafah. U.S. officials insist they did not veto the Security Council resolution because it ties a ceasefire to the release of hostages. The U.S. says it did not vote yes because the text did not condemn Hamas. U.S. officials told journalists the U.S. was disappointed the Israeli officials won't be coming to Washington, but insisted there was no change in U.S. policy.
There should be a ceasefire and that there should be a release of hostages, which is what we understood also to be the government of Israel's position. So it is a bit surprising and unfortunate that they're not going to apparently attend these meetings because, as you heard the secretary say in Tel Aviv on Friday after he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other members of the Israeli government, we believe that, number one, a full-scale invasion of Rafah would be a mistake.
Defense Minister Gallant remains in Washington for talks with U.S. defense officials about the conduct of the war in Gaza. Gallant said Israel had no choice but to continue the war.
אנחנו נפעל כנגד החמאס בכל מקום, גם במקומות שבהם עוד לא היינו. אנחנו נייצר אלטרנטיבה לחמאס על מנת שצה"ל יוכל להשלים את משימתו. אין לנו זכות מוסרית לעצור את המלחמה בעזה, עד אשר נחזיר את כל החטופים אל ביתם. אם לא נשיג הכרעה ברורה ומוחלטת בעזה, זה עלול לקרב מלחמה מצפון.
And joining us now with more on the UN Security Council resolution and U.S.-Israel ties is Aryeh Lightstone, former advisor to the U.S. ambassador to Israel and one of the leading architects behind the Abraham Accords. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So a major rift between Israel and the United States. Jerusalem is very disappointed and has even canceled its delegation to the U.S. Meanwhile, the Biden administration saying it's perplexed at Israel's response. So is this truly a U.S. betrayal of Israel, or is this simply being blown out of proportion?
Had you finished your sentence with the Biden administration is perplexed, that would have actually been a pretty accurate description of the last 3.5 years of American foreign policy. The Biden administration doesn't know the difference between left and right, up or down. It's been a woeful disappointment in terms of leadership. If you remember, President Obama shamefully failed to veto a UN resolution condemning Israel in December of 2016. He waited until December because he felt that there would be no political ramifications after the election. President Biden, fulfilling the third term of Obama, has shamefully abstained from a resolution that hurts Israel prior to elections because he believes that this will help him. I am pleased to tell you this might be the only time that I'll agree with Obama. The American people are not with Hamas. The American people are not with the United Nations. The American people stand strongly with Israel and will elect a leader who will stand strongly with leader because this one is clearly not capable of doing that.
And do you think this is a rift that the U.S. and Israel will be able to overcome, or do you believe that relations are now entirely frayed moving forward?
No, the relationships are most certainly not entirely frayed because the funny thing is, after you get past the political people trying to win a state in Michigan, the entire apparatus of the United States of American government wants to see Hamas eliminated. If you believe that there are countless civilians who are innocent in Gaza, the only way to protect them is to eliminate Hamas. If you believe that there are not countless innocent civilians in Gaza, the only way to protect Israel is to eliminate Hamas. Either way, everybody knows that Israel must eliminate Hamas unless you have an election relying on 100,000 people who are going to vote in favor of the person who supports Hamas. Once you get past the electoral part of this, everybody knows that this is fraudulent.
And, turning to the resolution itself, sort of what practical or real-world ramifications will this have on Israel, if any?
None. But it will enable the United States of America to go to the cocktail parties that it so desperately wants to be invited to. When you lead, sometimes that's hard. That's why it's called leadership. When you lead and nobody follows, it's just somebody out taking a walk. Right now, President Biden is just out taking a walk. There's nobody following, frankly, because he doesn't want to lead. To not lead on a UN resolution that especially has no teeth is just embarrassing as an American.
And you know, just hours after the UN vote, Hamas rejected a hostages deal, saying that it will stick to its original demand of a permanent ceasefire. Do you think there's a direct connection to this UN vote, as many critics are claiming?
Yeah, no, I don't think you need to be a critic or an expert to understand how leverage works. If anybody's tried to lease a car, you walk out of the lot and see if the salesperson will come and chase you. Well, on behalf of all of the terrorists, all of the hostages who are still being kept hostage by the terrorists, President Biden has folded completely and totally and has given up all U.S. leverage in order to make it that much harder for Israel. Israel will have to go on its own. It will have to go into Rafah. It will have to exert more pressure on Hamas because diplomatically, time and time again, the United States of America and the rest of the free world has decided not to exert the leverage that it could have to bring these people home.
And one other point that we've talked about before on this show, but Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the verge of a peace deal before October 7th. All the Abraham Accords partners are watching very closely now how the U.S. is treating its closest ally. What ramifications could this have on future peace deals and on U.S. influence and credibility in the Middle East and the region?
I assume every leader from around the world is already calling President Xi in China. Because they've decided that you cannot rely upon the United States of America right now. Everybody, if they weren't watching the U.S. elections closely, they will be watching them far more closely because I think they need to decide and evaluate whether America is back or not. Nobody's allies with America to watch them abstain from a vote at the United Nations. Nobody's allies with America for them to be wishy-washy on the most morally clear conflict, certainly of my lifetime. And so America, in order to be the America that that I love, that I'm an incredibly proud citizen of, in order for that to be the America that's the most sought after alliance in the entire world, we're supposed to lead. And that comes with responsibility. And right now, it's just not happening. So the Abraham Accord countries have been spectacular standing up in these challenging times. But for them to expand without a strong U.S. relationship, going to be really hard.
All right, Arya Lightstone, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you.
And moving on, Israel's security forces announced they had thwarted Iranian attempts to smuggle advanced weapons into Judea and Samaria for terror attacks against Israelis. Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, and it is reportedly attempting to ignite the West Bank amid the ongoing war against its terror proxies Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. The details in the following report. The Shin Bet, or Israel's security agency, announced on Monday that it had thwarted a major Iranian network for smuggling advanced weapons into Judea and Samaria in an effort to help Palestinian terrorists carry out attacks against Israelis. According to the Shin Bet, the head of the network was Iran's Unit 4000, a special operations division of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, intelligence organization led by Jawad Ghaffari, and Unit 18840 of the Quds Force in Syria, which falls under the Division 840 led by Atzal Bakri. The Shin Bet also named Munir Makda as one of the masterminds of the operation, a known Palestinian terrorist working with Iran and Hezbollah. Makda is said to have been trying to recruit and advance terror attacks against Israelis in the West Bank. The agency said it had discovered the vast network after arresting and interrogating Palestinian suspects plotting to carry out terror attacks against Israel. The smuggling attempt sought to improve terror capabilities in Judea and Samaria and enable Palestinian terrorists to carry out larger-scale and more advanced terror attacks. Among the weapons confiscated included significant explosives with shrapnel capabilities, anti-tank weapons, grenade launchers, plastic explosives, rocket-propelled grenades, assault rifles, and many other weapons. And now turning north, where at least 12 pro-Iran terrorists with links to the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, were killed in airstrikes in Syria. Israel has confirmed that it struck the targets overnight. Meanwhile, Hezbollah launching numerous attacks on Israel Tuesday in yet another major escalation. And the IDF retaliated, hitting Hezbollah terror targets in Lebanon, which, according to Lebanese media, mark the deepest strikes conducted by the IDF to date. And moving on now to politics, as Gideon Sa'ar, head of the New Hope Party, announced his resignation from the coalition government. His departure does not come as a surprise and poses no real threat to the ruling coalition. ILTV's William Sharon has the report.
Israeli Minister Gideon Sa'ar, head of the New Hope Party, announced his resignation from the unity government after his demand to be appointed to the war cabinet was denied.
לפיכך, בלב כבד, אך שלם, הודעתי לפני שעה קלה על כוונתי להתפטר מהממשלה וחתמתי על כתב התפטרות לראש הממשלה כנדרש בסעיף 22 לחוק יסוד הממשלה. אבל איני יכול לשאת באחריות כל עוד אין לי, לפי שיפוטי, אפשרות מעשית להשקיע על כיוון המדיניות. פשוט אינני רואה בכך עוד תועלת.
Sa'ar's departure comes just 2 weeks after his split with Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party, which together had formed the National Unity Party. Sa'ar's party held 4 seats, and so the coalition will now drop from 76 to 72 seats in the 120-member Knesset. The coalition still maintains the majority, and so his departure does not pose an immediate threat to the government, unless it prompts Benny Gantz to leave the coalition as well. Sa'ar was once a member of the ruling Likud party, and was a rival to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before breaking off and forming a new party with Gantz. When their party entered the unity government, Gantz was guaranteed a position in the limited war cabinet, while Sa'ar was not. His resignation now reflects this frustration.
And now there are still 134 hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza. One of the hostages is an employee of global e-commerce giant Amazon, which has yet to make a statement calling for his release. ILTV's Emily Schrader was in London, where on Monday night a spontaneous rally erupted outside Amazon UK's offices for the hostages. Let's take a look.
I am here in London outside the Amazon UK offices, and as you can see behind me, there are dozens of flyers of kidnapped Israeli hostages who are being held captive by the terrorist organization Hamas. And here behind me, you can see that there are activists gathered in order to put up more flyers. Now, the reason that they're gathering here outside of the Amazon offices is because one of the Amazon employees is actually among the kidnapped. You see here, Sasha Trofanov is 27 years old. He was kidnapped on October 7th by Hamas in the Hamas massacre that was carried out against Israeli civilians. Now, the reason they're activists here is because Amazon has yet to make any kind of public statement in any of their offices, including their office in Israel. So these activists are here demanding that Amazon take action, make a statement, show solidarity against the terrorist organization Hamas.
Thank you, Emily, from London. And now, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Mostly clear skies are expected tonight, with temperatures sitting at lows of around 14 degrees Celsius or 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, partly cloudy skies and steady rising temperatures set to reach highs of around 25 degrees Celsius or 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channel, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our new and improved website, iltv.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Ladar Gavelazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.